Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm Roch Turner. I work at the mighty Bitterroot College in Hamilton, Montana, which is situated about 45 miles south of Missoula. So I'm in the very southwestern corner here, just a few miles from Idaho, really. Today I'm going to talk about the strategic planning process. We've got quite a bit to cover today. Unlike other years, we're going to cover the planning process as well as the implementation process. It's best, I think, to cover that all in one session, but it does mean that we're going to have to move kind of quickly. So I apologize if I'm speaking quickly. Additionally, there's a lot going on here when I'm giving this presentation, and so if you do have a chat request, there's a chance that I won't see it, and if I do, it might distract me. But Lacey's going to be looking for it, and she'll alert me to any chat questions. So feel free to ask as many questions as you can. And let's see if we can dive right into this process here. Okay, so the strategic planning is necessary for any organization. The reason, and I'll do my best not to read right off the slides. I'll trust that all of you are reading the slides, and I'll just elaborate on what we've got to say here. But the reason that strategic planning is necessary for all organizations is that if we don't know where we're going, if we don't have a plan and direction, then our actions tend to be somewhat haphazard. And the value of the strategic planning process is that all of the decisions in the process should be, as implied, strategic. It should be a very specific and prescribed set of actions that your organization will take moving forward so that you can realize your mission and your vision. It is focused on the organizational the intent of the organization, what the organizational focus is, and why the organization is there to begin with. And at times, the strategic planning process will shift understanding of organizational focus. It does give you a clear vehicle for long-range plans and decisions for your organization. This is something that should be available either electronically or in hard copy for regular use. So all staff, administration, stakeholders, everybody involved should be able to access their strategic plan when they have questions about how they intend on moving forward or how their day-to-day operations will go down. When it's implemented correctly, it's going to save a ton of time and a ton of money, which most nonprofits are short of, and it's going to give a greater opportunity for success and reduce the risk for failure. And lastly, it's a good tool to inform decision-making. So if you're curious why your organization is doing something or how it should do something, the strategic plan should offer some very clear answers for that. So it's a building block for next steps, and it puts you on a successful pace. Not only is the strategic plan a series of actions that your organization will take, but those actions are bound by time. And so it will be very clear what's going to happen a month from now, 3 months from now. And if the organization is successful, then we'll know that we followed that strategic plan as prescribed, as opposed to just setting maybe a nebulous goal on what we're going to do in the future. We're going to achieve our mission by this, but we don't actually say when or how. A good example of that is when Walgreens was not always a convenience pharmaceutical company. It had a different mission long ago, and at one point, old man Walgreens came into the board meeting and he said, in 5 years, we're going to be a convenience pharmaceutical company, start making changes. And 6 months later, he came to the board meeting, and at the end of the meeting, one of the folks on the board said to everybody, and don't forget, we've only got 5 years to become this convenience pharmaceutical company. And old man Walgreens said, no, we have 4 years and 6 months. It's time bound. It's important that we adhere to the time that we set in our strategic plan. Otherwise, you find yourself trying to start the process down the road when really you need to start sooner rather than later. It's a disciplined effort to produce decisions and actions. And by discipline, I mean it takes a series of meetings, sometimes long, tedious meetings that include all of the stakeholders involved in the organization. And it requires a lot of commitment amongst all of those stakeholders to ensure that the strategic plan is well written and prepared in a fashion that will allow people to execute the strategic plan and not a haphazard process. It also encourages strong communication. As with everything in life, communication is key. And if there's a lack of communication among stakeholders when writing the strategic plan, you run the risk of alienating the stakeholder, at which point your strategic plan may be leaving out a key component that was the viewpoint of that stakeholder, and that could threaten the success of your organization. Some important considerations: again, communication is a critical role. Inform, motivate, involve. This can be a somewhat, I don't know, non-exciting process. So it's important to keep people motivated on why the strategic planning process is underway. What's the reason for doing it? Is it so that you can have another bureaucratic document to put on the shelf, or is it so that you can guide your organization to success and ultimately serve your constituents to the best of your ability? I would argue that it's the latter, and that needs to be communicated regularly so that everybody understands why they are there. Collaboration is important as well. Open dialogue and idea formulation happens from interchange of thought, and the interchange of thought can't happen unless we're collaborating with others, whether it's other individuals, other organizations. These things are important. Otherwise, the strategic plan, again, will be lacking in some areas and won't allow for success. And from the beginning of the process, there should be accountability and responsibilities. So when the initial meeting happens and everybody decides that the strategic plan is a go, we're gonna go ahead and follow through on the process. Everybody should have a responsibility to the strategic planning process, along with benchmarks for accountability, whether it's tasks that are time-bound or overall elements of the strategic plan that they're responsible for. Okay. Lacey, the first poll question should be on slide 16, and I can't see what slide I'm on. I don't know if that's something you can track. If not, I'll recognize on slide 16 or actually on slide 17 that was when it was. Just an aside there, folks. Okay, phase 1, preparing the plan. This is where things get exciting. Initial planning would focus on steps required for success. So, of course, what does success mean? What are we here for? Why is our organization creating a strategic plan? And what are the steps going to look like in getting to the realization of an achieved mission and vision? All of the roles and functions are described and implemented. So, of course, when it's all said and done, at the end of the 3 to 5 year process, that the strategic plan was good, so to speak, you should be able to look back and say, yeah, everybody that had a function or a role in the process achieved that function or role, and they were committed to the plan and action oriented. Strategic planning focuses on achieving the best fit between the organization and its environment. As you'll see later in this presentation, the environment in which the organization is situated is a critical component to determine whether or not the strategic plan will be successful. You'll see that my note there is that this is from Bryson, 1995. For all of you that just love the thought of strategic planning, Bryson was a seminal author. Many, if not all, of the modern strategic planning books stem from Bryson's book on strategic planning for nonprofits. So a lot of this presentation builds off of Bryson. And at the end, the last slide has a list of sources if you're interested in following up on some of those sources. The organizational purpose statement should mirror the values and encourage direction. So the purpose statement, similar to the mission statement, is basically what is your organization there to do, and that's based on this vision of what would happen if the organization could achieve success 100%. So, for instance, an organization that's focused on ending homelessness, it's pretty much widely accepted that we don't have a mechanism for ending homelessness entirely, but the vision could be that's achieved, and if in fact homelessness is alleviated, then the organization is no longer needed, right? So that's what the purpose statement should indicate. Okay, so now we're going to discuss the mission, vision, and values of an organization. This is phase 2. This will drive the remainder of the phases of the strategic planning process. So it's important to, if your organization has a mission and a vision statement, to revisit those and see if they're still accurate, if they're still relevant to today's situation. I facilitated a strategic planning process on Sunday. It took about 4 hours, and at which point we went over this slide and then focused on phase 2 and phase 3 alone. and we came to realize that the mission and vision needed to be tweaked some because it had been about a decade since they had been written. And so if you do have one, dust them off and see if they're still relevant. And if you don't, this process will take quite some time because it's important to get this right. What are you there for? What would the world look like if you were completely successful? So in creating a mission statement, you need to represent the shared values and vision of the organization. By shared, I mean all the stakeholders involved, those that you serve, the folks working at the organization, funders if you deal with outside funding, everybody that's affected by the organization should be represented in these shared values and vision. And all of those stakeholders need to be involved in the process, regardless of how challenging they may or may not be to work with. The focus areas are organizational priorities. In a nutshell, what is it that your organization is meant to do? And you should focus on board, administration, staff, and community. Simply put, everybody that's involved in your organization needs to be involved in this process. For those of you that haven't heard of Covey 1999, you might take a look at him. He's sort of a seminal author in leadership theory, but he's not a researcher. And so an interesting point about Covey is that he hasn't done research himself, but he pulls the research of seminal authors in leadership for his particular area of scholarship, and he's highly regarded. And according to him, the effective mission statements deal with 4 areas of human needs: economics of human needs, relationships, growth, and spirit. So with regard to economics, we have to be mindful of whether or not our organization has the funds to support the mission and the organizational purpose. Do we have the relationships established to create these areas of success? Can we grow as an organization, much like people? Do we have the opportunity for self-actualization or organizational actualization? And do we have the actualization, excuse me? And do we have the spirit? Are we pumped about what we're doing? Are we excited when we get into work about solving these issues? In creating a vision statement, essentially the purpose is to act out the mission. So we know what our mission is. We know what we're here to do day to day. The vision is if we were completely successful. At times this can seem somewhat nebulous. If I work at a food bank, I might say that I will alleviate food insecurity in my town forever. That's a pretty broad statement, but that effectively is the vision statement because it's an action. It's acting out your mission statement. And the vision statement will also create a picture and be a statement of the desired future. So what, in the perfect world, what will things look like? Effective vision statements, they must communicate with the vision. So that's, sorry, I realized that it says principals must. That should be executive directors or organizational leaders. This was shifted from a presentation given to a school. So organizational leaders must communicate the vision. It should be clear to everybody what the organization is there to do and what the vision looks like. It should focus on specific elements of the vision. Of course, they should be trustworthy and show trust in others. If the organizational leaders are not somebody that people think they can rely on and trust what they say and trust in their actions, it will cause some well, I mean, distrust, of course, but it will also cause some problems within the actions of the organization because people that don't trust in their leaders oftentimes make decisions based on that distrust. Leaders should use the vision to help make decisions and solve problems. Like I said, the strategic planning process is meant to establish a document that can be used to inform decisions. And so as we hit obstacles in the road, it should be a good tool for addressing those obstacles. And lastly, leaders should communicate the vision constantly to everyone involved. The vision is why we're here. Our organization is here to solve a problem in our community, and we need to be ever mindful of what that issue is and what the vision is, and it's the responsibility of organizational leadership to continually articulate that vision. Additionally, we have to have a positive culture. I know it's cheesy, but if we come in with a negative attitude, our organization is just not going to do well. And if you have somebody in your organization that's perpetually negative, maybe come up with some good jokes. I've got one. I'll tell you right now. You don't have to answer on chat, but the joke is a string walks into a bar and the bartender says, "Get out of here. We don't serve strings." And so the string goes outside and ties himself in a knot and frays himself on the end. And he comes back in and the bartender says, "Wait, are you the string that I just kicked out of here?" And he said, "No, I'm afraid not." That is how you introduce a positive culture to your coworkers. Just a cheesy little joke that I like. So be positive when you come into work, even if you're having a bad day. Think on the bright side. Think about the people that you're serving. If you're working on food insecurity, if you're working on homelessness, veterans issues, education, you're going to have tough days. Those are tough issues to deal with. All of you folks are working on issues that are challenging, both emotionally, physically. They're just difficult elements of our society, and it's important to stay positive in the face of those issues. You should promote a safe, efficient, and effective environment. Safety, of course, is key, and I won't dwell on this, but at all times there should be an expectation of safety for everybody involved in the organization. And efficiency and effectiveness is a balance. The most efficient thing is not to exist at all. That's the most efficient thing that the organization can do, but that doesn't address the problem at hand. And effectiveness is not always efficient. So it's important to find the balance between efficiency and effectiveness in order to promote that success. It should collaborate with the families and the community involved. In the end, our stakeholders all are people, and people have loved ones, and those issues need to be addressed, and the nuance of those relationships needs to be addressed as well. And lastly, you should act with integrity and fairness, and of course, acting ethically, I think, goes without saying. But if you don't know, you should be ethical. Okay, phase 3: assess the strategic planning environment, gather data to guide decision making, and conduct a SWOT analysis. This is a good time for poll question number 1. I'm not sure which slide we're on. Lacey, can you do the first poll?
Yeah, I will launch it. I don't think you'll be able to see it, but once the results are in, I'll share it with you.
Okay. All right. I don't want to move on to the next one because it'll give away the answer. While you guys are answering, I'm going to take a drink of coffee.
I have about 4 more people.
Okay.
3 more people. 2. All right, I think I will end it now. And then...
Can't wait to hear the results.
Can you see? Can you see them, Roch?
I can't see them.
Oh.
Yeah, bummer.
Anyway, 100% chose strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
Oh, that's great. That's great news. The speed without thought, of course, is probably nobody wants to conduct that, and that's just my failed attempt at being clever. I'm not very good at making up fake acronyms. I think in Model UN, everybody learns how to do really cool fake acronyms, and I never did that, so I missed out on it. But you're right. It is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So in this phase, we're going to assess the strategic plan environment. So what is the organization's history and accomplishments? We've already gone through the mission, vision, values, what the organization is meant to do. But what is the history that brought us there, and what accomplishments have we experienced in achieving that mission and identifying the vision and values? It looks like I got a chat here. No, you nailed it, Nico. Thanks for the chat. Yes, so what have we done and where are we now? And we also need to assess the internal and external environments. What works well and what needs improvement. Internal environment being, for instance, like I talked about, a positive environment. Is everybody on board with what we're doing and why we're doing it? Is there a general sense of success and camaraderie and a shared understanding of what we're doing? And what are these outside? What is the outside environment? Are there other organizations that are similar that are working on the same issue, or are we all by ourselves out there on an island? These types of the components of our environment need to be assessed. And then we need to determine what's working well and what's not, and either double down on what's working well or work on what needs improvement, or maybe a little bit of both. There we go. So we're going to gather data to guide decision making. The last thing we want to do is make decisions based on anecdotal evidence. It's important to have a clear understanding of what's going on before we make these decisions, because after all, this is going to guide our organization for 3 to 5 years. And so if that's not decisions, if those aren't decisions based on data and actual useful information, then the organization is just off doing whatever it would like. We want something to be more strategic. So we're going to gather that relevant internal data about the organization. What's our budget situation look like? Are our workers performing at the highest quality possible? If so, could they use further professional development? Or if they're not, would professional development affect their performance? Do we have the proper technological infrastructure to carry out our organization in today's world? I don't think you'll find an organization that doesn't use technology in some capacity. And then we're going to review the external data: political, economic, social, and technological issues. Political issues can largely be our biggest obstacle. Economic issues can affect some organizations differently. In some cases, a good example would be the nonprofits in Pinedale, Wyoming. For a decade, there was money all over the place because it was a hotbed for gas extraction. And now the gas extraction has dropped off dramatically, and those organizations are hurting. So that the economic situation affects their ability to serve their constituents. Okay, so now we get to talk about the SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. This part can take quite some time. It should be an iterative process. So you'll go through and conduct a SWOT analysis with your organization that might take 2 or 3 hours. It should be a very lengthy process, and then you'll find that hours after you finish the session, somebody will say, "Oh, I forgot about this weakness. I want to put it on the list." And that's important to come back afterwards and add a component to this list, to this analysis, because all of those components will inform future decision making. When I conduct a SWOT analysis, I tend to start with the strengths. But you'll find that as you're discussing strengths, different weaknesses, opportunities, or threats will pop up. And so I have all 4 categorized. And when somebody mentions a weakness based on a strength, then I go down, make a bullet point in that category, then come back to strengths. As we conduct this analysis, we'll have a series of bullet points that address each of these components: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Then I go back through the process and I try to tease out the details behind each one of those. If our strength is that we have a committed staff, I want to talk about what makes our staff committed and why that's a strength. If a weakness is potential loss of a grant opportunity, I want to ask why we are not going to get that grant when we typically are used to. Those are just examples, but you want to tease out as many details as possible for the SWOT analysis. Once the SWOT analysis is over with, you're going to have a bunch of data collected, and you're going to use that to make strategic decisions. So now we move into phase 4. We want to articulate strategic issues. These issues are the organizational goals and objectives the strategic plan will attempt to address. So we know that we've got all these strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Usually the first time an organization goes through this, their strength category is substantially longer than the rest. A lot of people have difficulty addressing what their weaknesses are. Threats usually are pretty easy to identify. Opportunities can be somewhat difficult to identify. Weaknesses usually are the most difficult, and strengths are easy to come by. And so we want to work through that process so that we can understand what the issues are of the organizational goals and objectives, so that we can attempt to address those. So the first thing to understand is the organization's readiness for change. Not all organizations are ready to change. You'll see that I've cited Getzels and Guba. Getzels and Guba are change theorists, and so they had spent a lifetime studying what it means for an organization to make change. And one thing is clear from the onset: change, cultural change in general for an organization is a long process. So we need to understand if we're going to write a 3 to 5 year strategic plan and we want to address our organizational culture and change it, are all of the stakeholders involved ready to make that change? If it requires greater commitment in the workplace, if it requires greater funding source from whoever our primary funder is, if it needs more personnel, less personnel, we have to understand whether or not we're actually going to be able to make the change before we set out to write this lengthy strategic plan asking our organization to change. So constantly be thinking about our readiness to change and keep that in mind when we're articulating the strategic issues that we want to address, and incorporate these different elements of change theory into the process. So what are the internal stakeholders' roles in the planning and implementation process for every person inside the organization? What will they do and how will they do it? How often will they do it? Detail that to the greatest extent of specificity that you can, and determine whether those roles are suited for the individual personalities and positional responsibilities. This part is critical as well. It's best not to ask somebody to do something that they're simply not capable of or not willing to do. There's a fine line of capability and willingness, and whether or not we find excellence based on achieving that fine line. And if somebody's either unwilling or incapable, we're doing our entire organization a disservice by asking them to move forward on that task. So sometimes you need to find somebody else, or you need to find a way to reorganize those goals based on the personnel that would be best to achieve the goals. So after we compile the data in the SWOT analysis, we've addressed organizational readiness for change. This can be a long process, and it can be difficult to be truthful with ourselves, but it's important that we are. Then we're going to look at relevant administrative, financial, and governance priorities and mandates, and the completion of this phase then leads into actual writing of the strategic plan. So at this point, we've got theoretically a pretty lengthy document. By the time I'd completed this phase on Sunday with the nonprofit I worked with, like I said, it took 4 hours. We've got about a 12-page document that will continually evolve. And so although we could technically be done with this because we've completed all of these steps, like I said earlier, it's iterative, and so we'll go back and revisit these things over the course of time, probably over the course of the next 30 days. And we'll do a lot of that via email. We might meet face-to-face one more time, but we'll add some depth of thought to everything that we've done so far so that it's clear and people have an opportunity to voice their concerns or their interests. It's important to note the two categories that we can put people in, the extrovert and the introvert. When we bring people together, the extroverts tend to think on their well, they speak as they're thinking, and so if there's a question or a concern, it's easy for an extrovert to just get out there and say what's on their mind, and introverts tend to spend some time to think about what they have to say, internalize it, and then voice it. And so at times, extroverts can control these types of events, and so we're mindful of that by allowing people to re-engage afterwards via email or phone calls to add some of that depth of thought to the total conversation, and that helps us sort of contextualize what the process looked like as we move forward so that everybody truly does have a voice. Let's see how we're doing on time. Oh, we've got a chat. What would happen if your SWOT analysis data revealed an inefficiency at your nonprofit, but the nonprofit was resistant to correcting it? Well, that's a good question, and that would be a challenging situation. I guess the real question about the inefficiency is whether or not you're an AmeriCorps member serving in the organization, if you're in the leadership team, or any place in between. If you're in a leadership capacity, I think it'd be important to look at what the organizational culture is and why they're unwilling to address inefficiency. All organizations have inefficiencies, and so this might be an inefficiency that will prevent the organization from achieving success. It might be something that just slows us down from achieving success. But from a leadership standpoint, it would be time to start thinking about organizational change. From the standpoint of an AmeriCorps member or a staff member or an outside stakeholder, I think that it would be important to collaborate with your co-goers, the people that come to work with you, and ask them what they think about the inefficiency and why, and try to get an understanding for the landscape of the organization so that so that you can understand why there's an inefficiency in the organization, and from there you'll be able to understand if you can bring it to leadership, or if you can bring it to outside stakeholders, make people aware of the fact that there's an inefficiency. If it's a glaring inefficiency and nobody in the organization is willing to address the inefficiency, I would question the viability of the organization as a whole. But it's pretty rare that an entire organization is unwilling to address an inefficiency. I would be eager to get some more details on that. So if you want to contact me and ask me questions specifically, I'd be more than happy to visit with you. And Lacey's got my number. You can call for everybody. If you have questions on these or anything else, you can call my cell phone or you can email me. I'm pretty open to communication. I hope that helped. So we've got now, looks like 10:30. I'm going to try to get to the point where we're wrapped up, enough time to ask questions for 15 minutes or so. I think we're on track, but feel free to ask questions as we're going, just like I said earlier. So phase 5 is creating the strategic plan. I gotta get my computer back in place. There we go. So we're going to create goals and objectives. Once the core future strategies are decided, so we've gone through this entire process, we understand what our strategies need to be, what changes we need to make, where we're going, why we're going there. We have a set of priorities. Then we can begin making these goals and objectives. Virtual Strategist is an organization that does online training on business strategies, and they call this the long-term strategic objectives, to show that they provide a high level of view of items between where we are today and that future state broken down in a balanced way. So essentially, we want to be at this place in 3 to 5 years. We know where we want to be. We know why we want to be there. What are the steps, and how do we break those down into manageable tasks and objectives? These goals should take into consideration financial issues. So do we have the money to get there? If we say we're going to increase the people we serve by 40% or by 100 people, do we really have the financial capacity to achieve that goal? We need to be very clear and careful with how we calculate whether or not we have the financial stability. What are our customer concerns? If we're going to increase the number of people we serve, are the people we're currently serving getting the best possible service? And so it makes sense for us to increase that level of service to more folks or not? Are we achieving operational excellence? And if we set a goal that's too challenging, will that affect our operational excellence and result in operational mediocrity? And then in general, the people, everybody involved, are these goals and objectives, are they effective for the people that we're serving? So Virtual Strategist recommends less than 7 long-term strategic objectives. I would never go more than 7. I tend to stay closer to 5. I think 5 usually encompasses what an organization is meant to do and what the goals are. Let's see, I think this might be a good place for the next poll. I'm not sure which, oh boy, here we go. I'm not sure which slide I'm on, but Lacey, can you do the next poll question?
Yep. All right, it is launched.
Oh, this is good. We gained a person since the last poll question.
Just a few more seconds of a couple more people.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to end the polling now. So we have 30% that say 1 to 3 years, and then 70% say 3 to 5 years.
Okay, so the actual answer is 3 to 5 years. So when we're taking into account our long-term goals, we want those long-term strategic objectives to be 3 to 5 year objectives. Anything less than that would be considered short-term, and we can have a series of short-term objectives that lead up to 3 to 5 years. But we want all of our long-term strategic objectives to take us to that 3 to 5 year mark. The reason that we choose 3 to 5 years is that in less than 3 years, it's reasonable to expect that not much will change, and that it makes sense to continue using the strategic plan as originally intended. After 5 years, so much can change. There are presidential elections, there are congressional elections, there are economic situations that are out of our control, there are financial issues internally that we might not be able to predict. Anything over 5 years is just it's a bit long and too far out for us to try to predict, but under 5 years is a reasonable time to assume some stability. And so 3 to 5 years is what we set those long-term strategic objectives by, and we should expect to revisit this process every 3 to 5 years. If some major issues have happened, there's been major change in organization, you might want to revisit at 3 years, although that's pretty early. I would say that a plan to revisit at 5 years and have ready to implement a new plan at the 5 year mark is a good idea. So with clear long-term objectives, our short-term goals can be identified, and those should be defined by using some SMART logic, and that's specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time-bound. So first, the short-term goals can range from anything like week to week. Our goal each week is to serve X amount of constituents, or to attend this many webinars, or whatever we want it to be. Month to month, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. But anything more than a year, we start creeping into the long term. And then, of course, like I said, short-term goals are never 3 to 5 years. Those are our long-term objectives. But our short-term goals are our day-to-day goals, essentially. Though that should drive our everyday actions. So what do we do today if we have a question about what we're doing or what we're supposed to be here doing, what's due in March? Our short-term goals should be able to answer that, and those goals should be very specific. This is not like the vision. These are very specific goals. We're going to apply for $500,000 in grants in the next 6 months. So that's specific, right? It's specific in that we're going to write grants, and we can identify what those grants might be. We're going to write X amount of grants for X amount of dollars from the federal government or from the state government. It's measurable because we've put a time on it, both the time and the outcome of the grants, 500,000. That's measurable. It's actionable. We know that our staff can write that many grants. It's realistic. Those grants are available, and it's time bound. We've given ourselves this 3 months or 6 months or whatever the window is. It's very important that these are time bound. Otherwise, like I said earlier, those goals tend to fall to the wayside and are less. They're not as prioritized as, say, our day-to-day action, like checking emails and the things that are more mundane about the work. We need these short-term goals that we can bite off on a regular basis to realize success and keep ourselves motivated. Like I said, it can be arranged on a year-to-year basis. Virtual Strategist admits that it's not always possible, and it's not. For AmeriCorps members, you're not going to do a year-to-year. These are my 3 goals for the next 3 years, because likely you're not going to be at your organization for the next 3 years. And so for you, if you're in the middle of a strategic planning process, you might ask for some short-term goals that are specific to you, but you might also have those year-to-year goals that span up to 3 years for your position in general. That helps you have a longer-term horizon. So you have goals that are with milestones that are due in year 1, year 2, year 3, yada, yada. But also those short-term, month-by-month, day-by-day, week-by-week goals. You should be developing projections with long-term and short-term goals established. You can establish the financial impact of the plan. Your leadership can get the best market projections. This can be challenging because it's like reading the future, but we need to do the best we can to identify what the market is going to look like in 3 to 5 years, what our goals are going to cost the organization. That's a critical component. Do we have the money? We need to take into consideration the potential for price increases over time. If your organization has a series of goals to drive all over eastern Montana and serve people in those small rural Montana communities, are there going to be issues in vehicle maintenance increases, fuel increases, things like that? There's going to be some price fluctuation because prices are never steady. And then are there financial entailments or market instabilities in general that you need to worry about? A good financial assessment is going to make for allowances for a number of external forces. You should have identified these in the SWOT analysis, but it's important to keep an open mind and understand that we're not always able to predict everything. No matter how strategic we are, we'll make mistakes or we'll miss things. We need to be as nimble as possible when these types of issues crop up. So we're writing the strategic plan. It's written out as a step-by-step assessment of the present situation. And then these recommendations for the future events. So we know what the present situation is, and we can identify that very specifically. That's easy to write down, but we're recommending something for the future, and that should be noted in the strategic plan. This is something that we expect, but there's no way for us to know. And there's no set format for the plan. So you could certainly Google a strategic plan template, and you would find a template of what it might look like, but it's not necessarily what it has to look like. If it appeals to you, if you like the way that it's organized and the way that it looks and it's aesthetically pleasing and you think it's functional for your organization, feel free to adopt it. If you think that it's none of those, then don't adopt it. Make your own template or just keep searching for a new template. Like the slide says here, the shape on paper will reflect the character of the contributors and the needs of the organization. So the people that are most involved in the strategic plan are probably going to have some characteristics come out in what the strategic plan looks like. But it should reflect as much of the work has been done in phases 1 through 4, and then list the steps that will be taken in phase 6 and 7, which we're going to get to next. But all of the stakeholders involved should be identified and what their contributions were and how those contributions are incorporated in the strategic plan. Like I said earlier, and I continue to say, every stakeholder involved in your organization needs to be a part of this process. So then this thing is written, the key members of the organization, the stakeholders, everybody endorses the actions. And so we say as an organization, we're in it to win it. This thing is a keeper, and we move forward. So the final product, the end of phase 5, will be a complete strategic plan, either electronically, hard copy, or both, something that can easily be referenced. Any questions so far leading into how we've written the strategic plan? If so, feel free to chat. I'm going to go into the final phases of the strategic plan, which are implementing and evaluating. And for this portion here, I'm going to review just slightly before we go into exactly how we implement. So it requires organization to closely examine who they are and where they're going. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? Where do we want to be? It's a discipline effort to produce those decisions. This is a very strategic plan for creating the strategic plan, right? We're thinking ahead, we're having regular meetings, everything is well thought out, well articulated, so that everybody understands where we're going and it's not haphazard or nebulous. And we understand our purpose statement, and it mirrors our values and encourages the direction of the organization. We've established the mission versus the vision. The mission is what we do every day. The vision is what we want the world to look like if we're successful. We've conducted the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threat analysis. We fully understand every component of that, and we've detailed that to the extent possible. We've established that our organization is ready for change. The strategic plan is something that everybody is willing to do and ready to do. They might not be happy about it in some cases, but in general, everybody's on board, ready to go. We've established our goals and objectives. We know where we want to be and each small step that everybody on staff and all the stakeholders will take in order to achieve those objectives. And we've established these long-term and short-term goals. Okay, the final poll question. Who is this guy, Lacey? Are you there, Lacey?
Yeah, I just launched it. Sorry.
Okay.
Five more people. 4 more people. All right, I'm going to end the polling now. So we have 7% say Gary Johnson and 93% say Will Smith.
Okay. This is, in fact, Will Smith, famous actor. Gary Johnson, I know the Hatch Act prevents you all from participating in political action, but Gary Johnson is the presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party. While there are some similarities, they do not look alike. I just put this slide in there to try to wake people up because I know that PowerPoints are brutal, and you probably would enjoy doing other things on the side of your screen. But I appreciate you guys all being here. We're narrowing in on this. We're almost through, and I'm glad most of you know who Will Smith is. He's a tremendously talented actor. So we want to manage the transition with appropriate approval from leadership. Of course, these strategic plans are never going to take place without approval from leadership. Then the individual changes needed for each short-term goal can be assessed. So what can you as a staff member or an AmeriCorps member or a stakeholder, what are you going to do with each short-term goal? How are you going to achieve those goals? And managers and staff should identify their role in the change and recognize the time limitations for each objective. So if we set a series of short-term and long-term goals appropriately, it should be possible. There shouldn't be time limitations for each person in the organization to achieve those goals. As most plans will be developed with an annual schedule in mind, as normal, I think every organization I've been a part of, the schedule typically comes on an annual basis with smaller chunks broken up. This can take the form of goals and related changes over the coming year. So you might operate on a fiscal year, on an academic year, on a calendar year, but each of these small goals should be assessed based on the time that you can get it done. If your organization takes a month off in the summer, it might not be a good idea to set a 2-month goal that starts in June and is due on July 15th because you're off in July. So those are the types of things you need to keep in mind. Once the changes needed for success are identified at the lower levels, it's possible to create these discrete departmental level plans. So essentially, I know what my goal is. I've been given a goal as part of the strategic plan. I've accepted that goal because I was a part of the process. And so now I can make plans on my day-to-day calendar on how to implement the actions needed to achieve that goal, that short-term goal. No plan is complete if you don't talk about how you're going to execute it. It's kind of like the age-old adage, if you don't plan, you plan to fail. You have to talk about these goals and what you need to do to achieve the goal. That's part of achieving the overall mission and vision and achieving the strategic plan successfully. So that going into the next strategic planning process, it's about what you've done successfully in recent years and what you'll be successful with in future years. To that end, everyone in the organization needs a clear action plan. So everybody should have a very specific understanding of what they're doing, and that should be in the strategic plan. According to virtual strategist, he or she needs to know their piece of the overall plan and what they're responsible for the year or for the quarter. Everybody on staff should know exactly what they're doing, and it should all be lined out with the strategic plan. And being successful with that element largely depends on involving everybody in the actual strategic planning process. Virtual strategist also recommends determining when groups will meet to talk about the strategy and make adjustments or adaptation. So essentially, What are the groups that need to meet to talk about those goals, about the short-term goals, long-term goals, the day-to-day actions? How do you compartmentalize those goals? Who's in that compartment, and how often do they meet to establish whether or not they're achieving success and strategize for ways to meet the goals effectively? At the end of phase 6, the final product would be an annual plans or action plans for department or individual level. So there should be a very clear expectation and understanding of how each of the goals are going to be achieved. It should be written down someplace, again, electronically or hard copy, but it should be accessible to everybody in the organization. So if I want to know how the department across the hall is going to achieve their specific goals, I should be able to access them, and likewise, they should be able to access mine. Okay, if you're not in a PowerPoint-induced coma yet, then you're probably going to make it to the end. The last phase is evaluating and monitoring the strategic plan. There are effectively 4 reasons why a strategic plan can fail. Insufficient resources. So you plan because you have this pie in the sky idea of what you're going to do, but you don't plan for effective resources. As a result, you're not able to achieve any of your short-term or long-term goals. That's a very common reason for failure. Another is circumstances change. This one, in large part, can be out of your hands. So you can have the best strategic plan available, and then the government entity that oversees or funds your organization stops funding it. Other, state or federal legislation puts those resources towards the same cause. There's a lot of things that can happen that are out of your hands. The circumstances changing, in large part, is an outside source, and you can try to predict for them, but you won't always get it right. Too many policies to maintain. This is an internal threat. If you have established a strategic plan with so many policies that it's impossible for anybody to keep track of them, much less actually adhere to them, there's a likelihood of your strategic plan failing. And then lastly, a shifted environment. And that's another one it's an external force that you may or may not be able to predict. We do our best in the strategic planning process, but this could affect our success. These 4 reasons for failure are something you should keep in mind throughout the entire process, including implementation, and try to gauge whether or not you're on the verge of realizing any of these components of failure. So the strategic plan and planning process, when we evaluate, we need to ask ourselves if it helps guide short and long-term planning. When we create the plan, when we're in the process of creating the plan, will we be able to take it off the shelf and guide these short and long-term plans? Are the resources allocated and organized for each area of the plan? Is there funding available? Funding is always key, especially in the nonprofit world. Is it easily understood by people who are not involved in the process? So while we should involve all stakeholders, you might have new stakeholders in the future or turnover in staff. And if somebody comes in, if your organization hires somebody who's never had anything to do with your organization, can they take the strategic plan off the shelf and understand it entirely? They should be able to. And does it take into account the needs of the organization's direct and indirect factors? A thorough plan will take all of these components into mind, so that basically you've covered all of your bases, and anybody can walk in and take over. If you have a total turnover, everything's good to go. It's an understandable and well thought out strategic plan. You need to consider if the plan is a product of collaboration among committee members. Did you invite all stakeholders? Is everybody that's responsible for the organization or served by the organization involved? If you're addressing homelessness, are you working with some of your stakeholders that are experiencing homelessness, and are they helping to inform the process? Has it been adopted by all board members? Again, it's leadership involved. And then do the yearly plans meet the following measures? Has it been staff developed and implemented? Is the staff involved? If leadership is creating a strategic plan and they're leaving the staff out, they're doing it wrong. Is it easily implemented, monitored, and referenced? It should be. It should be so well understood and easily understood that you can move on it and watch how it's being done, and you can reference it for regular day-to-day actions. Does each yearly plan operate under the strategic plan? I would argue that if your yearly plan doesn't operate under the strategic plan, either your yearly plan is wrong or your strategic plan is wrong. Is it realistic to the needs of the organization? The entire thing has to be realistic, from funding to timing issues to the reality of whether or not you can achieve the goals. The strategic plan will need to affirm and monitor, update, revise the plan at least once a year after the plan is implemented. So go back, take a look at what's going on, and see if it needs any sort of minor revisions. It should never need a major revision unless you've experienced one of those 4 key areas for failure. If you haven't achieved if you haven't seen one of those 4 main areas of failure, then each year you should go back and just reaffirm that you're heading in the right direction, or make some sort of revisions based on current situations. Maybe it's loss of a grant that you counted on, or a loss of a key staff member. There's a lot of reasons why you'd want to revisit this to make sure that everything's good to go each year. And then you're going to evaluate the needs of the process, which is crucial into the further development of the strategic plan and following the plan. So who does the monitoring? There should be a person from each area of the plan that's assigned to monitor and bring the committee any necessary changes. That's usually a departmental leader or somebody that's in charge of a specific task within the strategic plan. And then the strategic planning team, who reevaluates, will get feedback from everybody through these people, usually in leadership capacity. And then that team's going to come together once a year and discuss how the plan is coming along and whether or not changes are actually necessary. And so you can consider the strategic plan like a roadmap into uncharted territory. You don't know exactly where you're going, but you have a pretty good idea. And this is going to guide those decisions. And with the decision, there's going to be consequences, and we use the consequences of those decisions to reevaluate the direction we're heading. And that, my Amera friends, is the end of the strategic planning training. You'll see a list of references, and if I look at my phone, it's 10:56. So unfortunately, I left you 4 minutes to ask questions. Does anybody have any questions? My plan is just to sit here in silence while I wait for a question, or until 3 minutes has expired. I hope that's okay with everybody.
You can see the chat feature, right, Roch?
I can, yeah. But I'm not seeing any actual chats.
Yeah, I don't either. Thank you.
That's okay, though. So I'm going to put in the chat box, if this will let me type. There we go. That's my email address. And that's my number. So if you guys want to reach me, that's a good way to do it. This has been recorded, so you can access it later if you're just super pumped about strategic planning and want to revisit it, or if you're feeling sleepy but you need something to push you over the edge into falling asleep. You can call me. Oh, here we go. Would you suggest an outside evaluation or mediator for the SWOT analysis? That can help. That's what I did on Sunday. I was an outside evaluator, mediator. I called myself a facilitator in this for this specific event. It definitely helps having somebody that can be realistic about what your organization is doing and whether or not you're truly addressing weaknesses. On Sunday, I had about 4 pages of strengths and then 3 or 4 bullet points of weaknesses. And that typically means that people are not being realistic with themselves. Also, don't feel rushed. I'm not going to log off right at 11. So if you have questions, feel free to type them out. I'm going to stick around until everybody's done. There are some benefits to doing the SWOT analysis internally, but the risk is that people either don't understand their own weaknesses or they're unwilling to address their own weaknesses. Particularly as it relates to metrics and program evaluation. I think that outcomes and measurables are a pretty critical component. I think that for this portion of the process, program evaluation should be honest. You need to make sure that whatever metrics you're choosing to evaluate the program is available to everybody involved, that it's a realistic metrics, that there are expectations that make sense for each department or each area of your organization. And I think for program evaluation, it's important to bring in the folks that you'll be evaluating and ask them, what is it about what you do that is important to evaluate? You know, what are you proud of? What are you somewhat upset about? Just be honest with everybody and include everybody possible, and then the metrics will sort of establish itself with the group, and the program evaluation can be an honest evaluation. Let's see, some of these questions are only addressed to the panelist, I think. Would you mind repeating? Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, so the question was, I'm working with board members to update our strategic plan, particularly as it relates to metrics and program evaluation. What is your advice for this part of the strategic planning process? And then I just gave an answer for that. Honesty is pretty critical in the strategic planning process. It's really easy when we're talking about what we do to focus on what we think we do best. We don't always act with, I suppose, with integrity when we're discussing what we're good at and what we're bad at, and whether or not we have room for improvement. I would argue that we all always have room for improvement, and organizationally, that's without fail. That's always the case. What do you think, Lacey? Think there's any more questions coming?
I don't think so.
All right, well, I've got 11:01. I put my email address and my phone number there. If you guys have other questions, you can shoot me a brief email if you want to have an in-depth conversation. However you'd like to get a hold of me, feel free. And then I hope to see all of you in person at the Building Engaged Citizens Conference in beautiful Great Falls, Montana. Will pretty much everybody be there, Lacey?
All of our people, the Montana Campus Compact, AmeriCorps leaders, and Vistas will be there.
Okay, good. All right. Well, then I'm going to sign off.
Sounds great. Thanks, Roch.
Yep. See you guys.
And just a reminder to everyone to email me and let me know you were here. That'd be good. And I'll send out the recording and everything in a little bit. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Roch.